This is the Cameron Journal Podcast. It's a place where we talk about important things. It's a place where we bring a little slice of the news to you. It's a place where we do important things, have important conversations. It's also things that I like to talk about. My name is Cameron Cowan, and this is the Cameron Journal Podcast. Today on the Cameron Journal Podcast, we have Alan Wolff. He is the filmmaker behind The Sound of Violet. It's a book and movie about a young autistic gentleman who accidentally, through no fault of his own, of course, falls in love with a prostitute. And speaking as someone who's actually autistic, I have lots of questions about this, so we're going to dive right in. Welcome, Alan, to the Cameron Journal Podcast. How are you?
Thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good.
So why don't you tell us from the beginning, how did you end up writing this book, making this movie? How did this story come about?
It was originally inspired by my own awkward dating life. I mean, there are a lot of characteristics from Sean, who's the main character in the movie, that I share in my own history and life. One is just a naivete and in terms of people that I was dating and the expectations that I came to the relationship with. And he also, part of his journey is he's not desensitized to touch at the beginning of the movie. And I also had my own issues with touch that I didn't even realize before I started getting into relationships. So, they say that writers often will start with their own stories as the core of a story. And that's definitely where I started from. And then as I developed the character, I discovered that he as I delved into his character, I I had people read the early drafts of the story, they would communicate to me, something is different about that character. I can't put my finger on it, but you've captured something, and I don't know what it is. And as I continued to do research, I realized one day I think he's autistic. And I looked at how I created him and some of the issues that he struggled with, and I realized, oh, I think that really makes sense. And I had had my own experiences and relationships with people who are autistic, and so it fit in really well. And then I thought, okay, well, that as a writer, it's a great launching point for the story because he is both really interested in connecting with others, but finds it challenging himself. And so I thought, okay, that could be a really good launching pad for the story. So then I developed that into the novel and got really great feedback to the novel, and then eventually turned that into the motion picture.
All right. Lot to unpack there, but that's an excellent jumping off point. I appreciate that. So there's a the reason why I was particularly interested in this, because this is not something I would ordinarily have on the show.
Mm.
Um, and like I guess the part like where my primary concern is, we'll just get right to the difficult part. Autism is very rarely portrayed well in media.
Mm.
Um, there's a couple really kind of notable sins of that, Big Bang Theory being the most recent
Mm.
version. And so when you were working on your character, how did you bring his autism to life?
Well, I think any character that you're creating is is an adventure because you're doing a lot of research, talking to a lot of people, and I didn't want his character to be representative of every autistic person because every autistic person is very unique and different, and everyone has their own struggles and different issues that they have. So I didn't want to come up with something that felt representative of everyone. And so I just, in talking to people who are autistic and talking to people who are have relationships with autistic people, I have a relative who's autistic. I just was able to take characteristics from just different people's experiences and stories and use that to flesh out the character.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense for sure. When it comes to uh book and movie and all this type of thing, tell us about your independent sort of, I guess, publishing and filmmaking journey. How what's that been like? How's that been?
Well, doing a movie and a book are very different experiences because in a book, you have to write everything that you're hoping the reader is able to picture in their mind. Whereas with a movie, with a screenplay, you're creating a blueprint that then you go into production and it's like you're creating a building. But with a book, it all has to really be complete by the time you get it onto the page. So it's very laborious, especially writing a book, because it takes a really long time. And then you're getting a lot of feedback from people. And anyone that you're getting feedback from is committing a few days of their life to reading your book and giving you feedback. With a screenplay, it's they're maybe committing an hour and a half to 2 hours. So it's very different in terms of the process. But as I developed the book and got feedback, I kept reshaping it and changing things. And in part of that journey, in the original version of the book, my impression of women who are prostitutes was very much in line with how Hollywood typically portrays people in prostitution, which is the empowered woman who's doing this out of her own, choice to get ahead. And then as I did research, I discovered that nearly 100% of the time these women have experienced some kind of abuse or trauma in their past that has led them down this path, or they've just been trafficked. I mean, someone has just outright trafficked them into that lifestyle. So once I discovered that, I started working with organizations that help people who have been trafficked, and they helped me to look at that part of the story in a very different way. And so that was really part of the challenge because the book and the movie deal with two issues, autism and trafficking. So the challenge is, how can I do the best job I can at portraying each of those in an accurate way while also creating an entertaining movie? Because no one wants to go to see a movie and feel like it's homework. So I thought, okay, how can this still be a film that people want to go out and see on a Friday night? They want to rent with friends. They want to enjoy. And so it's a huge juggling act, but it took a lot of I got a lot of feedback, a lot of development. And after the book was written, it won a number of awards, which is very affirming. And then from there, I developed the screenplay and did the movie. And even after that point, the editing process, you're still shaping and reshaping your story. So then I showed it to test audiences, and it's a laborious process, but it's always fun. For me, one of the best parts of it was when the movie came out in theaters, experiencing the movie in theaters, because then I could hear the audience reacting, hearing them laughing, gasping. I could tell people were crying at a point in the theater. You don't get that as much with the book. With the book, you get people writing to or writing reviews and telling you what they think, but it's a whole nother experience to just experience it live in a theater with people.
No, no, certainly I can understand that. I remember when I first got the press packet for this, I was, it was a while to book this. It's been on the books for a while, and so I've been when this finally popped up on the schedule, I was kind of like, oh, I was wondering where that appointment had gotten to. I wondering when that had happened to that. So I fear that we probably missed every premiere date and every release date, and we're months behind on this. But
Not really.
such is
Actually,
the
it came out
nature.
quite recently, so you're not behind at all. So it just recently came out on Blu-ray and DVD, and that's on digital. So now people can watch it wherever they are.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting all the feedback that you sought out. I don't seek out feedback on my work at
Mm,
all. That's one of the
mm,
things I always hated about film and television when I worked in film and TV is that
mm,
everything goes to test audiences, and I feel like, you're writing by committee sort of thing.
mm,
And with my books, I very rarely give it out to beta readers, though usually the first person to have read it beyond small readings to friends is the person who edits it.
mm.
Um, so what is it about all that feedback and all that data that was so valuable to you?
Well, I feel like there's a certain point in the process where I start to lose my objectivity. And with the film in particular, because I also edited the film, I know there's a certain point where because I've seen the same scene 30 times, I start to lose objectivity. And so it really helps me to bring someone in and to get their feedback because it just shakes up my perspective. So they might see something that I didn't see. And even if I completely disagree with them, it still helps me to look at it in a completely different way. So I always appreciate feedback, even if it's feedback I don't agree with, because it helps it even in that moment helps me to realize, okay, why did I choose this particular moment? Why am I choosing to portray it this way or do it that way? And it helps me really think that through more to make more deliberate choices.
No, no, that certainly makes sense. I think that's interesting. I I left a project last year. I was writing collaboratively with somebody, and he's kind of like, oh well, I'll write this and then get some feedback and see what people think and all this type of thing. And I kind of always tell him to be kind of like, would be careful with that because
Mm,
you end up with a book written by committee, and it's really about your vision and and what you kind of want out of this. So to that, when you first started down this path and this journey, what was your vision for this story? And do you think you achieved it?
well, my vision first was to create a story that people could connect to emotionally because I think the main character in his pursuit of a relationship, he's really in pursuit of love and he's really in pursuit of unconditional love. And I feel like on some level, all of us are in pursuit of unconditional love. It's not easy to find. And so I I just thought, I want people to be able to connect with that. And at the same time, there are parts of Sean that are a challenge for him that even parts of himself he doesn't really like. He wishes was different. But so part of his journey is realizing, no, those differences are actually what make you who you are. And you need to actually find someone who appreciates you for who you are. So I think all of us on some level feel like, oh yeah, there are parts of us that don't feel as lovable or as acceptable. And so just finding those relationships where we feel loved where we are is it's world changing. And so I wanted to take that from Sean's perspective and then from Violet's perspective, she feels very similarly because here's a woman who has been trafficked, who is sold, and whose love meter has been just broken, really. I mean, it's been smashed into the ground. So she doesn't feel loved and accepted for other reasons that are very different from Sean. And so you take these two very broken people who've experienced trauma in their lives and you put them together and then you see what happens. Like how do they find a healthy relationship? And so I thought a lot of people could connect to that even if they don't share the struggles of Sean or Violet. They could still, on a deeper level, understand their struggles and their desires and really connect with that, and then hopefully enjoy the journey that they see them go through.
Yes, I know, I think it's an interesting I here's, I guess, what my concern with the film was, and I'm heartened about, like, what you've said, is too oftentimes this comes off as, like, a very sad it can come off as a sad kind of trope, like, "Oh, the poor autistic kid can't get it
Mm,
together and doesn't
mm,
realize what is happening," and all this sort of like, it can
mm,
get very stereotypical
mm,
along the way.
mm.
How did you fight that? Or do you think you that was a concern?
Well, it's interesting. I have not found any romantic comedies where an autistic person is the lead hero. I just haven't. Maybe
No,
you
I
know
don't
of one?
imagine we would.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I really loved that part of it. I loved that here is someone who's autistic, who is the hero of the story, who shows others how to love well. And so I thought that in and of itself would be groundbreaking. And I've heard criticism where people say, "Oh, you're doing things that are stereotypical." I've heard of that on one side. On the other side, I've heard from people who are autistic who say, "Oh my gosh, I've struggled with that exact thing." I had multiple people email me and say, "Wow, I was in relationships where I was naive about who that person was. I was taken advantage of." I've had parents email me and tell me, "Wow, like we've experienced that with our kids as well." So no matter what you do, as I think you've kind of alluded to, you're always going to have someone criticize you for whatever you do. It's always going to be there.
Oh, you can
So
always find someone to complain about something.
that's right. That's right. But for me, I was ultimately encouraged just to hear from people themselves who not only are autistic, but also at the Q&A we did after the New York premiere, there was a woman who stood up and said she is a former Violet, that she was trafficked and how meaningful and touching the film was for her as well. And she was crying. I was fighting back tears. I mean, so just to experience real life people, telling me how much the story meant to them and how much it moved them is what is ultimately just so satisfying.
No, no, that's excellent. That's excellent. So kind of broadening our scope, how did you get into writing and filmmaking?
I think from a young age, it was a way of communicating myself because I started writing screenplays, filming movies when I was pretty young, like in elementary school. And as I look back on the early films that I made, they were had issues of like fitting in, being a leader, like finding your place in the world. And I look back and realize, okay, I kind of think that was maybe some art therapy that I that I was working my way through. So, I loved being a storyteller at a young age. Then I went to film school at New York University, and that was just a great time of honing my craft. And so I just love telling stories and I love connecting with other people's stories and connecting with audiences. And it's just thrilling. I absolutely love it. So I hope to tell stories like that for the rest of my life.
No, no, certainly. I appreciate that for sure. And so now what other is this isn't your first film, of course. You edited it yourself, so I imagine you have other work. What else have you done?
So I've done a lot of short films, but my previous film that will actually be re-released this year is a psychological thriller called In My Sleep. And it is about a man who thinks he may have murdered a good friend while sleepwalking. So it's very kind of edge of your seat, but it's a director's cut is coming out later this year. So this was my second feature film, and this film was based off the first novel that I wrote. And then beyond that, I've also created 5 board games. So, and then I have a podcast called Navigating Hollywood where I interview people who have been successful in Hollywood and talk to them about their journeys. So, yeah, just
No, that's
love
absolutely
hearing
fascinating.
people's stories and telling people's stories.
Yeah, no, I found Hollywood so unapproachable. Like
Mm,
I had a friend of mine who he took me to this big like screenplay writing convention in LA where
Hmm,
apparently a lot of screenplays are bought and sold, and we went there and all this sort of thing. Um and I just it's just so like it will take you, I mean, it will take you years before you ever make anything. And that's why I fled back to books, was because
mm,
I could get something done in a timely manner rather
mm,
than, trying to even get to the place where something could even get made in Hollywood seems like such a journey, and it just
mm,
seems so unapproachable.
mm,
So, and also just like in volume, I mean, like Quentin Tarantino's done like 8 movies his whole career.
mm,
Like
mm.
I want to be way more prolific than that. Like I don't know how you all do it. I would leave after 2 years in development. I would be kind of like, well, screw it. And I would just go home. I would just leave LA and go back to where I came from. Like, I don't know how you do it. How do you survive?
It takes a lot of patience. They say the average movie takes 7 years from start to finish to get it to the screen, and it's just true.
That's
There
nuts. I'm
it
sorry.
is
That's
not
insane.
it is nuts. Yeah, yeah, it is nuts. Especially, I mean, I've taken on a bunch of different roles from writer, director, producer. It's different if you're an actor, but if you're on the creator side of it, it just can take a really long time. I remember I saw a film, oh yeah, Rogue One. I rewatched that a few weeks ago and I thought, "Oh, what is that director up to, Gareth Edwards?" Because that, film came out a few years ago and yeah, nothing. I mean, he has not made another film. He has some things in development, but you would just think with the super success of that film that something would be on his plate to do next. But really, the challenge for every filmmaker is financing. I mean, that is what keeps every filmmaker from being able to do the next film. Even from the biggest filmmakers, Spielberg, Scorsese, down to the most indie filmmakers, all the same struggle is getting your film
Yeah, no,
financed.
no, I mean, it's I think it's such a different environment now. Like back in the 1940s, Republic Pictures, this old movie studio, they were so prolific. They cranked out a film a week.
Right. Oh, yeah, in the golden
And
age of Hollywood, yeah.
yes, I mean, they were cranking out a film a week.
Right.
And now, like, and the thing I find especially odd is with the streaming situation, I'm surprised there's not a production house that hasn't kind of taken on that ambitious work schedule to
Hmm.
just sort of just crank out this much. I mean, as the rest of the world goes faster, the demand for books is more, and so people are writing books, all this type of thing. As the rest of the media seems to be speeding up, film and television seem to be slowing down. Is that the
Well,
sense that you
especially
get?
I think now there's been a little bit of cratering in terms of streaming, and these streaming services have been overspending and spending a tremendous amount of money for content. But recently, with their stocks plummeting, they've really cut back and are making far less films. But I remember I talked to a friend of mine who's a publicist and works with Netflix, and he told me that Netflix on average was coming out with between 20 and 30 just movies a month. And the challenge is, how do you make those movies stand out? I mean, you can't. There's so many movies that they just disappear into the ether. And that's why it was important for me that my film first came out in movie theaters, because it just creates a different experience, a different dialogue when people are in a darkened theater and just giving the movie their full attention for those 2 hours. But it's a real challenge these days to not only just get a film made, but then after you make it, how do you draw an audience to it when there are so many other films being made at the same time?
Yes. No, no, that is definitely a challenge. And I don't know, I was hoping with the new sort of modern environment that that would step up kind of, because I mean, I miss 26 episode network TV seasons. I
Oh,
miss,
right,
like
right.
a good movie of the week. Sometimes a couple of these old movies of the week you can find on Amazon Prime and all this type of thing. And I don't know, maybe I'm just old school. I find all that stuff extremely comforting. Like, give me 90 minutes of a movie of the week from the 90s. I'm happy. Like, so I was hoping with streaming that we would get back to some of that stuff, and it seems to have gone in the opposite way. I don't know. But
Well,
I
it's
think it to your
what's
point,
really
yeah.
interesting, there's an article in the New York Times about this, is that when you're talking about those 26 episodes of TV that they used to make,
Yes.
that the television streaming came in and said, "Okay, we don't need to do that anymore. We can start just doing 9 episodes per season," which is kind of has been the British model for a really long time, except I think it was more like
Yes.
6 episodes. But what's very interesting is that they found that these shows that have 26 episodes per season, like Criminal Minds, Law and Order, those shows are now watched by way more people than the most popular shows on Netflix. So
Because
these
sometimes we don't need every episode to be serious. Sometimes I want something to watch while I vacuum, and that's the problem with these prestige
right,
shows. It's like you can't
right.
do something else because you have to be super invested because every moment's important. It's like I really need 42 minutes really of something I don't have to be that serious about because I need to do the dishes. And that's
Right,
why like
right,
that's what I
right.
miss about the old TV format is they needed at
Uh,
least 10 filler episodes, and sometimes I could do with some filler. Like,
That's right, that's right. Well, the filler's coming back because 'cause they're putting those shows now on streaming services. People are discovering them, and they're also discovering that with these episodes, they can get a full meal on one episode where they don't have to watch an entire series, that each of these shows have an entire story within that one
see,
45-minute
that's why I
time
love
slot.
A Good Murder, She Wrote. Jessica
Right.
finds a dead body. We find out
Right.
how it got there. Done and
Yes.
dusted. Like,
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah,
42 minutes to the
exactly.
second, off we go. Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, it is a bit comforting. Whereas, some of these prestige shows is kind of like, yeah, it's 10 episodes, but you're really in for a 10-hour movie that they have chopped
That's
into
right.
10 slices for
I know, so true. Yeah, absolutely. I mainly go for movies because of that, because I don't wanna feel like I have to invest myself in 10, 15 hours watching something. I really go for movies first.
Yeah, no, I definitely suffer from that sometimes as well with yeah, like I said, sometimes I'll find a super old movie from the 90s that was obviously a movie of the week sort of thing. And it's just kind of like, ah, that's nice. I can do that and it will be over and if I'm doing something
Right.
else or I fall asleep, I won't feel bad and all this sort of thing. Like it makes sense. It makes sense. So
Yes. Yeah,
yes. Well,
absolutely.
why don't you tell us where we can find The Sound of Violet and where to watch it, where to read it, where to experience it?
Well, you can go to our website, thesoundofviolet.com, and there are links to where you can watch it. It's on Amazon Prime, it's on Apple TV, Vudu, Google Play, and the book is at Barnes& and Noble, Amazon, basically wherever you buy books. So it shouldn't be that difficult to to find either the book or the movie. I wanted to give a different experience to people reading the book than the movie. So the book takes place in New York City. The movie takes place in Seattle. So the story is very much the same, but there are some different characters, some different experiences you get in the book compared to the movie. But yeah, check it out. And if you watch it, if you read it, you can reach out to me through the website, thesoundofviolet.com, and let me know what you think. I'd love to hear back.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, thank you for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Cameron.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.